All right, well, I am going to get us started. I think we're going to have lots of conversation today, so I want to make sure we have our full 50 minutes. We're hoping to end at 12:50, just so we have a few minutes to get back to whatever we have after this meeting. So I'll start with just an intro to Mike Callicrate. Mike is a farmer rancher, business entrepreneur, and family farm advocate. A native of Evergreen, Colorado, he began his career by earning a bachelor's degree in animal science from Colorado State University in 1975. After college, he started farming and ranching at St. Francis, Kansas. In 2000, he formed Ranch Foods Direct, a branded beef company and retail and online food store located in Colorado Springs. His fabrication plant processes high-quality meats, and his retail store sells those products along with many other seasonal and handcrafted items from the surrounding area. His company also operates a regional food hub, helping to collect and distribute locally produced food. In recent years, he transitioned his cattle operation in Northwest Kansas into a multi-species regenerative agricultural model with hogs and chickens as well as cattle. The animals are harvested at a USDA-inspected slaughter facility right on site, which reduces stress and improves meat quality. So thank you so much for joining us, Mike, and I'll hand you the floor.
Thank you, Liza. Really happy to be on here today. Love talking to the Farmers Union folks because they kind of see the world the way I see it, and around promoting the interests of family farmers in particular, as opposed to the bigger industrial model. I've been working on this alternative food system stuff since about 1998, when I couldn't sell my cattle anymore to the big meat packers. And so, but prior to that, I'd done some litigation and made the big meat packers pretty angry at me, and which then led to me not being able to sell to them anymore. And then I'd also been involved a lot in legislative issues, which so was Farmers Union. They were always there with the mandatory price reporting, country of origin labeling, efforts at restoring competition to the marketplace, many efforts, and all failed efforts in the end. Seems like whatever we would legislate something, we'd get what we wanted, but then in the rulemaking, the intent of that legislation would oftentimes, and most times, get reversed in the rulemaking. And so very frustrating, fighting, for our lives all those years to try to just stay viable. And then after the big meat packers wouldn't buy my cattle anymore, I actually only had one buyer left at the time, having started with 20 back in 1978. I had as many as 20 buyers I could sell to, and now I was down to one and then none. And so I decided I had to call the Secretary of Agriculture, Dan Glickman, asking him, why doesn't he enforce the Packers and Stockyards Act? And of course, his answer was, well, Mike, in this age of globalization, we need big companies that can do business globally, which was the wrong answer. But he at least got a hold of ConAgra and forced them to buy all of my cattle. And I emptied out my feedlot and I was done feeding cattle. 15 people went to town without a job, and it was a big hit on our community to not have that outlet for commodities. And so it was about a year later, I decided, why don't we just build the third leg on this stool? We got litigation, we got legislation. Let's build the alternative pathway to the market, but let's really do it in a way that the meat is better. Let's use an Angus cow with a Wagyu bull, for example. Let's improve marbling. Let's get rid of the performance enhancing drugs. Let's what if we could kill the animal where it is? I mean, what if everything could revolve around healthy soil, in a circular economy, as opposed to the linear economy of extraction that I was part of for so long. And so that's what we did with Ranch Foods Direct. And we got started in June of 2000, sending our first cattle to sell direct to consumers, which then evolved into selling to restaurants, institutional accounts, and schools, and a lot of other things over the years. But I think the timing is good right now to talk about, how do we build a profitable, safe, and monopoly-free pathway to the consumer? The markets have never been more concentrated and consolidated and more predatory than they are today. So let's talk about it. Never before has food cost so much, and with so little of the food dollar going to producers and food workers. A profitable, predator-free farm to consumer connection does not currently exist through the monopoly-controlled food system. I talk to a lot of people these days that want to maybe build a slaughter unit on their place, or get a mobile slaughter unit or a modular slaughter unit. And there's been a lot of demand out of these small plants for hook space and processing, to schedule processing for animals. But the thing they aren't realizing is you can't really sell through the existing wholesale retail food system and make any money. And you'll see what I'm talking about as we go through this. It really needs to be more direct to consumer type sales. But what if we could do it in a way that it would change the overall market? So those guys that raise too many animals to sell direct would get a better price also. How can we leverage the building of a new alternative food system into a better market overall everywhere? And I would argue that there is no market at all anymore. There's no market. It is simply a price that is managed by a handful of monopolists who cooperate with one another rather than compete. Yes, there is some competition at the sale barn if you've got several buyers present, but the problem is at the sale barn, you've got the feedlots that are receiving preference from the big packers in exchange for their captive supplies, which they've been able to push the market down with. And those guys have a significant advantage in the sale barn, say on average, probably $130 to $40 a head advantage. In fact, some of them have even got relationships with the packers where they're very likely getting a cost plus guarantee. So how would a farmer feeder that raises corn in Minnesota or Iowa, anywhere in the Midwest, how would that farmer feeder compete in a sale barn? And honestly, is there competition there when others bidding on cattle have so much of an advantage? The marketplace needs more transparency to expose those kinds of relationships so that we all know what we're up against and don't just simply lose our farms and ranches because we've been playing in an unfair marketplace and not even really knowing it. So what's the problem? Today, a handful of multinational monopoly corporations control our food and agriculture system. Their abusive practices jeopardize the economic viability of independent farmers, ranchers, small businesses, lock farmers into unfair contracts, and suppress workers' wages. Using their economic power and political influence, these same bad actors trap farmers on a never-ending treadmill of intensifying their industrial agricultural practices to squeeze an additional bushel of grain out of their already exhausted soil, only to sell it into an already saturated market. The results are lower prices, a never-ending need for government subsidies, and continued degradation of the environment, leading to greater extremes, weather extremes, and it appears that farmers have no way out. This is coming from the Family Farm Action Group, which I've become involved with here fairly recently in the last year or so. And they're doing a lot of good work on the issues that we're going to be discussing today, along with the Farmers Union. And so COVID showed up last March and really exposed a failed and fragile food system, one that lacks resiliency, one that just doesn't have the capability of serving us under stress. And so this is a picture of the Ranch Foods Direct store in Colorado Springs, our Fillmore location, which is our main retail store. these pictures were taken within 15 minutes of each other. So I just drove up the hill to the King Soopers store to the west, and this was their meat cases. And you do see a few packages of product in those bare meat cases. And what was interesting to me is that was your fake meat. This is your alt meat stuff that I don't think consumers are going to be all that excited about. I know there's some really wealthy people that have an interest in making this work, and they're going to have to can do a lot more convincing, I think, to get people to eat this fake meat. But what's troubling is the very packers that have been controlling our markets and driving, 43% of our ranchers off the land, and 84,000 feedlots have closed. Those same meat packers are also developing their own versions of these fake meats, rather than staying in their lane of killing livestock that's produced in our country. They're also the big importers, or at least depend on a lot of the imported product to be able to blend out their fats and so forth that they produce in these large plants. And so this is a picture of a failed food system. It brought it to light, and I think we cannot forget these empty shelves. We cannot forget how many people were sick with COVID, working shoulder to shoulder, and we can't forget how basically the president, through an executive order, forced those people back to work in those unhealthy and dangerous conditions. So I think we need to really seriously look at building this alternative food system and not losing sight of the objectives. More people may die from hunger than the coronavirus this year, says aid group Oxfam. Chronic hunger is a direct result of poverty, and poverty is the result of concentrated power and wealth. Andrew Fisher wrote the book Big Hunger, calls it an industry. Well, this is an industry I'd like to see go away. I'd like to see us address the poverty problem, the concentration of power and wealth problem, and bring people out of hunger, thereby bringing people out of poverty, thereby resolving much of the hunger issue. Market predators and pretenders. This is part of the challenges that we're dealing with. When we come up with these names like, organic or natural or family farm raised or humanely produced or whatever, the big companies are stealing our phrases. They're stealing our marketing and not changing anything. They're basically just putting a different label on what they were already producing. And so now regenerative agriculture is beginning to heal the damage of the industrial agriculture for so many 50 or so years that it's been around. We're starting to really make some changes. You even heard last night with President Biden's speech, talked about cover crops. President Biden now has advisors on his team that are talking about regenerative agriculture. They're talking about breaking up the meatpacking monopoly. This is the best news ever if we can just put together the power to get it done. And so it's exciting that we can manage in ways that reduce costs and restore soil health. But many of these appealing words and phrases are being stolen. And for example, here on the left, you've got your Shady Brook and your honeysuckle. This is Cargill, your good corporation there from Minneapolis, Minnesota. And you think about Minnesota, they've got a lot of big corporations up there, Cargill being one of the largest in the world, but also one of the biggest predators in the country. And so when you look at Minnesota politics, how much is that influenced by these big corporations with all this power and money? So wouldn't Minnesota be a great place to build a model of something better and different that better serves all of our interests, from people to animals to the environment? And so COVID exposed a failed food system, abusive, unhealthy, inhumane, and incapable really of feeding people. How soon we now forget, though. The big box stores have got their shelves filled back up again. Our business at Ranch Foods Direct went from 400% more than the year before, 4 times more sales in March last year than we had the year before through retail, to now maybe 30% more. So many people are very happy to go back to what they think is normal, and that's the big box store. And so the big meat packers have recovered their market share essentially. And I think when we talk about building an alternative food system, it's got to be very attractive to the consumer. And honestly, we don't need everybody to buy from us. We just need those that really care about things like the environment and humane treatment of livestock and fair wages to workers. And I really think that market exists out there in a big way, actually. So how do we become more food secure? How do we reduce and decentralize abusive market power? How do we ensure that farmers, ranchers, and workers earn living incomes? Rebuild rural economies, produce healthier and safer food. How do we become more resilient? And I would argue the small plants like Eric Klein, who we were just talking with prior to the session here, those small plants are the ones that are resilient. Those small plants don't run 110% by working on Saturdays. They've got room to go to kill more animals. They can increase their hours if they need to, as long as the USDA is willing to work with them, which so far they have not been willing to work with us. But the resilience is in the local regional food system model, not in the global model, not where the owners and the shareholders and the executives are rewarding themselves at the expense of their suppliers of raw materials and at the expense of workers. So we need to build a better food system, but it shouldn't be a mini version of what we have now. We shouldn't be building these little 500 head a day plants depending upon the same refugee worker that the big meat plant depends upon. We shouldn't build the new model, this mini industrial model plant with the absolute necessity that we buy livestock below cost of production, because we're selling to those same big retailers that have power over their suppliers to dictate price, leaving that meatpacking plant, whether it's Tyson, Cargill, JBS, or National, or me, with nowhere to go but to pay less for livestock and to be less generous with the workers who are actually making the money for the company. And so we need to build something different. We need to build a model that accepts the costs of doing business and does not externalize those costs. In other words, we need to build community around the food systems that we now build. In this new infrastructure bill, there's a lot of good talk about, how do we fund these new efforts? And I think if we come with a plan, we can be successful in funding these from the public domain. I think ranchers and farmers have enough invested. They might want to put in a slaughter facility, but wouldn't it be great if we could develop some kind of a carcass demand out there from a new meat market model that employs many of these young people that are coming out of these new curriculums now, that are either in place or will be by next fall, where we're going to be training young people how to butcher and how to cut meat and actually how to run a meat market. And that would be the end result that I would love to see. So back when Abraham Lincoln was president, we were building the national railroad, and one of his advisors came to him and says, England, we can import those rails from England to build the railroads. And Abraham Lincoln said, well, why would we buy something that we could make ourselves? We can make the steel and build and make the rails, and then we also own the means of production, and that would be a smarter way to go. Well, Abraham Lincoln had a guy by the name of Henry C. Carey that was his advisor, and he said at the time, we must adopt measures needed for bringing together the producers and consumers of food, wool, and thus augmenting their power to have commerce among themselves. And so Abraham Lincoln, along with Henry Carey's advice as an advisor, started USDA and also the land grant university system, all designed to develop agriculture so we could feed ourselves. And so why is it today that oftentimes we are a net importer of food on a value basis? We've been a net food importer of food. And why are we willing to produce commodities below the cost of production for export? which then hurt other countries' producers. So what if we rebuild our ability to feed ourselves? It could be a lot of fun. And I know farmers love pouring concrete, so we could get a lot more enjoyment out of this thing because we're getting to build stuff, and farmers love to build stuff. Oftentimes, contrary to their own interest, that a lot of their capital goes into infrastructure that then the market doesn't reward them enough to pay for. And so let's go back to the Abraham Lincoln philosophy and the Henry Carey philosophy that says, let's do business more directly between producers and consumers and keep food local and regional. So what is the opportunity in selling direct? And so I just took a snapshot. This is a set of 80 head of cattle that I processed for a young couple in Kansas. Their finished weight on their steers was 1,437 pounds. That compares to today's average slaughter weight on a steer. The last USDA report that I just looked at this morning of 1,419 pounds is the average weight. So, and these animals were sold in eighths, quarters, and halves. And basically the animals were broken up into eighths. And so if you bought a quarter, you got 2/8, and if you bought a half, you got 4/8. But it's all pre-cut and put in a freezer so they can just sell it. And they delivered a lot of this directly to the consumer in some of the major bigger cities in Kansas and Kansas City as well. And so this was a direct to the consumer project that we did this last year during COVID. Average carcass weight was 912 pounds. They yielded 63.5, so they were finished, fat, really high quality cattle. And the retail meat yield bone in was 47% of the live weight. So there was 675 pounds of actual saleable meat. And we get no value for the hide. We get no value for the drop credit other than the heart, tongue, liver, and tail. We sell those, but we don't get the drop credits that the big meat packers have. So that's not calculated in here. But we did sell the meat at $6.75 a pound, which was lower. It was lower than the average USDA retail reported price that comes out every month. In fact, it was lower by about 75 cents. I think that got up to around 7.48 at this time. But these were priced at $6.75. That price today, based upon the number I looked at this morning, is $6.48 per pound on average. And in talking to the USDA reporter last week, he said, keep in mind, this price does not include the high value branded product or the high end prime and CAB and that kind of product that gets exported. And so actually this is very conservative in looking at this $6.75 per pound. So figure a slaughter fee. Now let's deduct the expenses. So we've got a $4,556 animal if you could sell it all at that retail price. Now deduct off the expenses of a slaughter fee at $125, a processing fee at $775, a carcass. We ship our carcasses into our plant in Colorado Springs, 200 miles from the Kansas-Colorado border. So that's $30 each. And then we had our packaging, box costs and so forth at $40. So total income after processing, after deducting the expenses, is $3,586 divided by 1437. That's $250 a pound net back to the farm and ranch gate for a 1,437 pound finished animal, $2.50 a pound live. Now that nobody can believe that. I mean, you just, as a rancher, you're saying there was no way we've been screwed that bad. Yes, you have been. That during that June of 2020, the current live cattle market was at $95. The retail price was at $7.48. You were getting, as a producer of those livestock at that time, you were getting 27% of the consumer beef dollar. That compares to when I started out in the 70s, getting 65% of that consumer food dollar, beef dollar in particular. And you know, from the Farmers Union report that comes out periodically, the farm share of the food dollar has honestly never been worse. And so I think the worse it gets, the harder we have to fight. So here's what I did. We got a mobile slaughter unit. We built this mobile slaughter unit in Columbus, Nebraska, at Flat River Manufacturing up there. This was an old IBP tram trailer that they hauled their half carcasses in from the small slaughterhouses to the IBP box plant. And we converted it. It's a really heavy duty. It's 60 feet long. Animals go in the side door near the front and into a carcass cooler, and then they load out of the back. This is you're looking at the corral system, the kill box that goes with this mobile unit right now. So this was set up out at St. Francis, and luckily so, because the packer I was using in Colorado Springs went out of business thanks to the predatory marketplace and his inability to do business and sell meat. Eventually, to control weather conditions and so forth, we put up a building at our place in St. Francis, which was half shop and half designed to hold our slaughter unit. So that big overhead door you see in the middle of the picture there is you back in the mobile slaughter unit. And now you're under a roof, the kill box is inside, the weather doesn't matter much anymore. You can see we've installed a hide puller there, and actually we're skinning that animal before it goes in the trailer, where it's gutted, split, and cooled. And that's the transition we made from the mobile slaughter unit being outside to inside. And you can see how the carcass trailer, this is a rail trailer, just simply backs up to the unit. That lets you transfer daily whatever you slaughtered. Maybe it's 15 or so head, which is about what the cooler will hold of big steers or heifers. And you transfer that daily. You quarter those into the transport trailer. And so after about 4 or 5 days, you've got a full load, and then it makes the trip to St. Francis. So this is a pretty inexpensive way to end up with a slaughter facility on a farm. And if you ever did want to quit doing it, this is a normal farm building. It's not a $350 per square foot, brick and mortar stainless steel kind of construction that a lot of places are going to be looking at if they build a purpose-built brick and mortar plant. And just yesterday morning, as I left St. Francis in this truck, I wanted to snap a picture of where we are now. So it's the same building, but we added on a carcass cooler. And this was about a $300,000 addition to the existing facility. But what it lets us do is it lets us process 30 animals per day into a drip cooler. And then on the other side of the cooler where the truck is parked is a finished cooler that will hold 40 animals. And then those animals get transferred into the truck and they make their trip to Colorado Springs. But this brought us up to a whole nother level of production, which now we feel comfortable in doing. Prior to that, if you've got a mobile unit and things don't work out, it has value and you can sell it, and you're not out a lot of money on a facility that only has a single purpose. And so this was our big step in this last year, is to get this cooler up and running. My son did all of the steel work and rail systems inside. And so, 3.5 hours later, yesterday, here I am with the truck in Colorado Springs. And this is the smaller truck. And the reason I'm driving this smaller truck is because we're hauling these carcasses in these big totes, these white plastic totes that are really heavy duty, because this truck does not have rails in it. But the trailer right behind the truck is one of the two rail trailers we have that we just alternate back and forth going to St. Francis to pick up carcasses. But we had to use the tubs there for a while until all the rail system was completed and finished, and we just hauled our last load of animals in those tubs. Although those tubs are pretty nice, if you've got some carcass accounts, it's a great way to deliver those carcasses, and you could load carcasses in those tubs per drop, and then easily just deliver those with the drop gate on the back of this truck at local butcher shops if you can develop some carcass business, which is always nice because you can kill animals a lot faster than you can cut them up. And so eventually in St. Francis, we'd like to go to a couple days a week, kill, and then cut maybe 3 days, custom paper wrap, simple stuff, bone in. And then, the other carcasses would go into Colorado Springs for full retail processing, which is a step beyond or 2 steps beyond the standard bone in paper wrap freezer beef that a lot of plants have been overwhelmed with in the last year. So this is our food hub in Colorado Springs. It's 22,500 square feet. It's the old Federal Food Service building. So it had 9 dock doors. It had a huge cooler, a big freezer, 2 other smaller coolers. It had an empty room that they hadn't used for much of anything than dry storage that we turned into a kitchen. So now we can do broth, we can do tallow, rendered pork fat. We make our own chili. The Mountain Pie Company operates the kitchen, and they make a really beautiful, high quality, delicious meat pie. Of course, all the meat comes from us, and we just take every opportunity that we possibly can in this food hub to incubate new businesses, individuals, couples, people who just have an idea, they want to give it a try. We give them the space to be able to do that and develop potentially their own business. A baker that we incubated several years ago in our old location, we gave him our kitchen so he could bake bread, and now he's got a thriving bread business with his own location here in Colorado Springs. So the food, that's what the purpose of this food hub really is. This is a picture of the carcass cooler in Colorado Springs. And, we provide space for meat processing, value-added food production, and distribution of foods from the region. We're also, in the last year, became the home of the Southern Colorado virtual farmers market. And so with this big dock space, cooler, dry storage, freezer space, and all of that, we're able to provide what the Southern Colorado virtual farmers market needed. And this was all curbside pickup. So you could call ahead or put your order in, and your order would be sacked and delivered to your car. You never even had to get out. And that's been going on now for a full year. And with the great news of the Southern Colorado farmers market is it didn't lose money last year. and that's a huge deal for their first year in business. In fact, it made a little bit of money, and that's with paying people rather than having all volunteer staff. This is our retail store in Colorado Springs. It's near our original old location that we ended up leaving about 3 or 4 years ago, but we wanted to stay in the community that we developed the business in the last 15 or so years prior to moving into that bigger facility, and it's worked out really well. This business will probably average around $50,000 a week in sales. It's got a lot of things from the region. We love to display the primal cuts to people so that they know we're just not buying box beef out of the commodity market and reselling it. This is meat that you can know where it came from and how it was produced. But throughout the store, you find products from people. Maybe it's soap made with some local tallow, maybe some with our tallow. Maybe it's some treats of some sort that's made down the street in the kitchen inside a coffee shop. But it's all about local, all about connecting the producers and makers of things to people in the community. And we've got a really good following in this space. Now, when holidays show up, the business doubles and triples, during the 4th of July weekend. This coming weekend will be big because the weather's getting better. They're going to be doing a lot more grilling outside. Christmas is crazy because you sell the really expensive stuff. We start saving prime rib around the end of August so that we'll have enough for the Christmas demand. And this is where I really think we have to go. And this is where the Minnesota Farmers Union could really come in and do some remarkable things. But this is a picture of the Queen Victoria Market in Melbourne, Australia, a community of 5 million people. This is a massive market, and this is not the meat hall. This is one of the other sections of the market. But in the meat hall, they've actually got carcass rails that run the full length of those aisles on both sides. And so if you're a meat guy in that market, you can buy carcasses, or used to be able to buy carcasses. Now, since Cargill and JBS have monopolized Australia's meat business and put out of business all those small guys like they did in the US, there's not so much carcass business here anymore. They're selling box beef because they really have no choice. But wouldn't it be cool if we had these kind of markets in your major cities? You know, Minneapolis, St. Paul. It becomes the heart and soul of the city, much like the Reading Terminal Market, perhaps in Philadelphia. And you know, someone like an Eric Klein could have a meat shop in this market with his carcasses on display. I mean, and selling product from the region. I know as he already does, but you know, put some skilled people into these spaces that can do things like charcuterie, you know, value added. All kinds of things can happen around our food supply that will really develop out the economic potential of our wealth creating rural communities, which today is being exported out of the state by way of the current monopolized and centrally planned and concentrated food systems. So this is my idea of building the alternative. So the centrally located, publicly owned market, keyword publicly owned. Let city council own this building. Let the public own this building. Perhaps it's got a separate board that manages this market, but the spaces are affordable and it's outside of the control of the big developers. This is not a food hall that's owned by a developer that's charging maximum rents. This is about community development and the ability to feed ourselves. So the centrally located, publicly owned market and food hub feeds the city. Foods from the region are processed, packaged, and sold, from meats to grains to produce. Locally owned businesses include a fresh meat market, a miller, a baker, a creamery, a cheesemaker, a brewer using local barley and hops, along with many prepared food makers sell directly to eaters and eateries in this affordable space. Seasonal markets outflow from the main market, welcoming producers and growers from urban to rural. This energy-filled year-round market is where community happens, a gathering place for residents and destination for visitors. How many times have you gone to an urban center and said, hey, where's life? Where does life happen around here? And honestly, at most cities, you know, life is at the McDonald's and at the Burger King and at the Walmart. And if you're in St. Francis, Kansas, life might be in the dollar store, you know, but it's certainly not on Main Street anymore. And so I want to see us create more of these spaces. And in talking with some Farmers Union folks this last week in Colorado, they said, well, Farmers Union doesn't typically take the lead on these kind of projects. And I'm saying, why not? Why not? There aren't enough farmers left to take a lead. It's got to come from an organization. It's got to come from the heart of the farm interest, and I think Farmers Union is the ones to make this happen. Our mobile slaughter unit that you just saw earlier in the presentation is on its way to Montana to be part of the northern Montana College's new meat cutting and processing curriculum, and they're doing a lot up there. And I'm suggesting let's build this model of slaughtering animals nearer where they are and selling the carcass and all the cutting operation within the urban center. And of course, with that, you've got your hamburgers, you've got your bread, you got everything that this mission statement or vision statement has to say. And so I think about Montana. They got Great Falls, they got Billings, they've got, it can be size appropriate to somewhere like Miles City. It could definitely, most definitely be in Helena and Bozeman and those type cities, those size cities. And so that's what I'm proposing. But this would be completely outside of the existing monopolized and predatory system that we're now living in. And so meat packers were paying 95 cents a pound for those 1,437 pound steers that we cut up and got $2.50 a pound. How in the world can that kind of theft go unchecked? How is it that our Congress, that the USDA can't see there's a problem with the Tyson fire and the COVID disaster when the packers take that much advantage of both consumers and producers? If you think about the northern tier of states, you're paying the freight on these animals. You know, you've lost your meat packers. The independent, small, regional meat packers are gone. So the northern tiers of states are kind of like Canada. They're paying big freight to get those animals down to Kansas into a feedlot that eventually those animals end up in a slaughterhouse. Or if you're finishing your cattle, you're paying a lot of freight. And you may not think you are, but it's darn sure calculated into the price you're receiving. And so it makes sense to build this model up north and in those bigger urban centers connected to those rural communities. The wealth creator should share in the wealth. That's what St. Paul said. You know, the husbandman that laboreth must be the first partaker of the fruits. That quote was cut in stone into the main interest of the USDA headquarters in Washington, D.C. in 1868. And this was the belief of President Abraham Lincoln and the people of his time. You know, Abraham Lincoln said he was more fearful of corporate concentration than he was the war itself. And boy, did that ever come true. And right into the robber baron era of the late 1800s and early 1900s. We broke them up then. We need to do it again. But look at the return on equity. This is March of 2020. And I tried to get the numbers this morning of last year's returns, because they're going to be even bigger. These packers have made absolutely record and unheard of profits on the backs of cattle producers and workers. Tyson, 5-year average, 17.2%. And this is supposed to be a competitive industry. This is a commodity. This is not value added and you know, patents and you know, where they have a niche. This is a commodity. This is something that anybody should be able to do. Kroger, just a retail grocery chain, one of the biggest in the country. Return on equity at 31.6%, but the big one is Cisco. So those of us that want to build meat plants and sell into the wholesale market, this is what they expect for returns. And there really isn't anything left for you if you pay a fair price for livestock and pay fair wages. So Cisco, 42.5%. That is on its own the evidence of a lack of competition in a marketplace. So the husbandman that laboreth must be the first partaker of the fruits. And it's only really been maybe in the last 50 years, at least in recent history, that the farmer has really, the rancher has really been taken advantage of. And here we go again, this cycle of concentration, consolidation, robber baron power, and we're back now worse than ever. In fact, I will argue anytime that we are worse off now than the days of the Upton Sinclair jungle, and in every regard, including food safety. So Minnesota, Amy Klobuchar, your good senator, just published and released the book this week. I listened to about a third of it already on my way back from St. Francis Wednesday. And you know, she's taken on monopoly power from the Gilded Age to the digital age. And you're gonna love the book. You need to buy the book and read it. But I'm just saying, with this senator on your side, Minnesota could be an example of how to build the alternative. Not just complain, not just hope some judge somewhere decides a case in your favor, which they won't. You've got to build that alternative food system, and you have to take this into your own hands, all the while keeping your pressure up on legislation and litigation and all of that. But we've never won. We've never won legislatively or in the courts. You know, my case in the court, the jury awarded us $1.28 billion, you know, in our suit against Tyson IBP. And the judge took it away very promptly. He reversed the jury verdict and made us pay Tyson's court costs of $80,000, or just under $80,000. And so it went on to the appeals court, where they agreed with this trial court judge, who was one of those dereg judges appointed by Reagan. And then it went to the Supreme Court, where they just said, yeah, this fair markets for cattle producers, isn't the Nicole Smith Family Feud case more important, which they decided to hear, instead of what I felt was the most important case in agricultural history, in at least in the last 125 years. And the Supreme Court refused to hear it. And so this is where we are. And I would say there is no market, only a price. And I was in Great Bend, Kansas a few weeks ago at the expo, presenting to a group down there of farmers, and I said, how many of you guys are selling this high price corn? At that point it was like $5.50 a bushel. It's higher than that now. And nobody raised their hands. They sold it in the fall. They had to have the money. So who's selling this grain? The buyer, Cargill, ADM, Bunge, people who drove the market price down last fall, who paid less than the cost of production, forcing farmers to live off subsidies, and now are selling it into the market at twice the price they paid for it. It's a racket. But by inflating the price of grain now, they get acres, and they also get to sell fertilizer, seed, and chemicals at higher prices. It is a racket, and we have got to stop playing it. So there's no market, only a price, managed by a few monopolists with the help from captured government agencies. I'm talking USDA and the producer organizations like the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, like Farm Bureau, like many of the state affiliates of both of these organizations. They fight for the interests of big meat packers and big retailers and big food service companies. So other books out there that are very timely and are making a big difference are these books like David Dayen's Monopolize, Break 'em Up by Zephyr Teachout, Liberty from All Masters by Barry Lynn, Monopolies Suck, Sally Hubbard. These are the folks that testified before Congress and before the antitrust subcommittee, and got a vote out of that committee to break up Google, Facebook, and Twitter. We're on our way. Let's keep up the pressure. And like Barry Lynn said, fight what's bad while building something better. What we talked about today is building something better. I want to see the Minnesota Farmers Union get behind it full force. Maybe it's the farmers, maybe it's a group of states, Farmers Union Enterprises that gets behind it. They've got some serious skills in how to run businesses. Let's build this new food system, and let's keep the investment at the farm and ranch gate low in the way of processing, and let's invest the money through community food utilities, perhaps, like Dr. John Eichert has recommended. The cities build the infrastructure for the further processing. They've got the investment in it, they'll promote it, and they will develop the market more direct to the consumer. So that's it.
Well, thank you so much, Mike. I just have such good information always. You're really good at I feel like getting the crowd roused up. Like, I'm excited.
Good. Good.
So it looks like we're just about right at our time. So I don't know that we're going to have time for questions today, but if I'm sure people do have questions, how can they contact you? What's the best way?
Go to MikeCallicrate.com, and you'll see a blog on there. And that's a good place to get information. And also there's a listserv you can get on. I don't put out a lot of stuff, but if it's important, I'll put out a news item on the listserv. My email is mike@nobull.net, NOBULL.net. And phone number 785-332-8218. We can put that on the chat if you want.
Sure, and I can send that out in a follow-up email as well.
Okay, sounds good. But always this next week, we've got guests coming into St. Francis. We got a bunkhouse where they're going to be spending the week learning how to butcher. The following week, I've got a group out of Tennessee that's coming in. They just bought a mobile slaughter unit, and they're going to get ready to to start doing some stuff down there. They're coming in to learn. And so our whole reason for being, my real reason for getting out of bed every morning is to increase income at the farm and ranch gate. If we do that, our communities will thrive, and we can bring back a lot of people that have moved to the cities because there weren't any real options in rural America. Let's create those. And that's why I get up every day. So.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Mike. This is a great presentation and a great first let's meet conversation. So thank you so much. And thank you everyone for attending.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
You're welcome.